Hello and good afternoon from Dubai. I'm Stephanie Ray and I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer of the RSK Group, and I'll be chairing today's discussion, part of our COP28 coverage on keeping 1.5 alive, which is really the North Star for global collective action on climate change. As the COP28 negotiations are going on around us, we're here to discuss whether the world can indeed get back on track to a future where global temperatures rise no more than 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. That's the target we set ourselves in the Paris Agreement, and which scientists generally agree will allow us to avoid the worst effects of climate change. Now, by no means is that a utopian future with no effects of global heating, but by acting fast, we still have the opportunity to create a safe, resilient future for both humanity and nature. But before we get started, a quick note on social media and housekeeping. We'd love you to share the event. Please tag RSK Group and use the hashtag #VoicesRising. And you'll find us on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook and Twitter. Shortly after the webinar, you'll receive a link to a short survey, and we'd be very grateful if you could take a few minutes to provide feedback so we can continue to improve the webinars we offer. All attendee microphones are automatically muted throughout the event. There'll be an opportunity to ask questions, and we will answer as many as possible, but apologies in advance if we don't get to your question. And we'll be using Slido for questions. So if you could get your cameras ready now, and hopefully there is a QR code that you can use. If you'd like to scan that code, it'll take you to Slido and you'll be able to ask questions of any of our panelists. So if I could introduce our panelists then, if you could all turn your cameras on and join me, thank you. I'll introduce you to our distinguished panel who'll be tackling the different aspects of how we keep 1.5 alive. The science, the role of business and finance, the skills we'll need and the human aspects of the changes we need to see. So first up, we have Dr. Robert Charnock, who's Director of Climate Change and Sustainability at the Metis Institute. Rob, would you like to introduce your background?
Sure, thank you, Steph. Yes, so I'm part of my role at RSK is I'm head of the Centre for Sustainability Excellence in Singapore, which is a group that focuses on climate strategy, climate risk, as well as the digital dimensions of water. But I also run the research group in Singapore too, much more focused around transition planning and climate finance, because that's my background primarily. I received my PhD in climate finance from the London School of Economics, went on to work for the Lloyds Banking Group Centre for Responsible Business and conducting research that's more impact focused, I guess, trying to really advise regulators on regulatory design. So for example, the UK's Financial Reporting Council on some of the more technical aspects of some of the disclosure requirements, shall we say. But I think that's enough for now. Thank you, Steph.
Thanks, Rob. And next, I'm delighted to welcome Mike Zimoni, a Senior Specialist at the UN Sustainable Stock Exchanges. Mike, can you give us a quick introduction?
Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you for having me, and welcome everyone. So as you said, my name is Mike Zimoni. I'm a Senior Specialist at the UN Sustainable Stock Exchanges Initiative, which is a UN partnership working to advance ESG issues in partnership with stock exchanges, including, of course, the investment into the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And we're very happy to be calling 130 stock exchanges globally our partners. So wow. Really leveraging the markets, the stock exchanges as the heart of the market to advance these issues. Very briefly about me, my background is mostly in sustainability disclosure and other sustainable finance issues, and I've really focused on the interface of policy and regulation and corporates and markets. So I've served in a number EU, UK, and other government working groups in this regard as well.
Brilliant, thank you, Mike. Next, we've got Martin Baxter, Deputy CEO at the Institute of Environmental Management and Assessment. Great to have you here, Martin, and over to you.
Thanks. Well, hi everybody, and greetings from Dubai, where I'm also at COP28 and have been speaking on green jobs and skills, and will be over the next few days as well. My background is I've been at IEMA for a long time. We're the global professional body for people working in sustainability, with members in over 100 countries around the world. And a lot of my role is working with governments on the development of policy and regulation, Particular focus at the moment on the whole skills, jobs, capability, capacity transition. And also I chair a group in the International Standards Organization of about 100 countries, 99 I think it is, which is an interesting committee to chair on environmental management standards, so in the 14,000 series.
Fantastic, thank you. That does sound like quite a chairing job there. I'm delighted also then to welcome Dr. Heather McKee, a behavioural scientist and expert in behaviour change. Heather.
Hi everyone, welcome. So I'm a health behaviour change specialist. I work with companies globally to help them create programs and products that stick. I've been an academic for years in the field of behavioural science, and I am obsessed with how we get irrational, free-range human beings to do what they're told and keep engaging with it long term. So today I'm going to focus on how do we build people's skills, knowledge and confidence to actually create climate positive behaviours.
Oh, we definitely need you here, Heather. Thank you. And finally, we have Simon Garrett, who's the Environmental Engagement Lead at Nature Positive. Simon, can you make the last of our intros?
Yeah, morning everybody. So I'm actually, so I'm with RSK Nature Positive, and engagement lead is quite a new role, and it's very much about taking engagement as an area where we can actually make a big difference. My background is actually as a biologist by training, but I've been working in the conservation sector for a long time, and the more I've been there, the more I've realized that the answers are all lying with people. And so my focus now is actually how and why people make decisions, the way they work, and how we can encourage them to make the right decisions to create the best future.
Fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, our esteemed panel. So I'd like to come first of all to Rob. Rob, can you give us a little background first of all, to get everyone up to speed on, why are we talking about 1.5? What's the magic of 1.5? And, from the results of the global stocktake, how far away from that trajectory are we?
Yeah, okay, sure thing. Thanks, Steph. So I think the history behind arriving at a core target for the UNFCCC for these climate change talks has been long and winding, shall we say. And at the heart of it, when we agreed on 1.5 at Paris, there were really two sides to this. The first is a long-standing project we've been working on, which is how do you define what counts as dangerous climate change? And then the other side of it was also a more pragmatic view of how do we make sure we limit warming below 2 degrees as well. So on the first one, defining dangerous, this really goes back to the start of these talks where the primary objective was avoiding dangerous climate change caused from anthropogenic climate change. Now, there wasn't really a clear definition of what that meant over time, but through the work of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, what we have found is where we start getting towards the riskiest impacts of climate change. So that can be on threatened species, it can be also on humanity, it can just be on the global climate system as well. So really what we saw was between 1.5 and 2 degrees is really where the risks go from being sort of moderate risks to really quite high risks. So that's really the threshold that's been established as dangerous climate change. But then if we go back to 2015 in Paris as well, most of the conversation there was will 2 degrees end up in the agreement? And it was quite by surprise that 1.5 arrived, partly because low-lying island states highlighted that they wouldn't exist at 2 degrees. But also it really meant that that long-standing conversation around 2 was emphasized that was the upper limit, not a target. That was absolute cap. So in terms of how we're doing so far, unfortunately, we're not on track for 1.5. At the moment, it looks like we're on track for at least 2.5 degrees of warming. But the way the Paris Agreement is designed is that does kind of our ambitions ratchet up over time. So previously we were on track for much more warming. I think it was even the higher end of the range was 3.6 not so long ago. So we're bringing that down over time.
Well, it's good to hear that we're bringing it down, but what's missing? What are the things that we all collectively need to do to get back on track?
Okay, yeah. I think to me that because of the way the Paris Agreement is designed, it is what we're aiming to do is gradually bring that down over time. So we're currently at 2.5, which isn't what we want. We want to get down towards 1.5. So really what we need as the end result of our efforts is for governments to be in a position where they can have stronger ambition. on climate change. And what I mean by that is it's not just entirely putting the responsibility straight onto government. It's saying everybody has a duty to create the conditions where governments can be more ambitious. So if you think, for example, I think one thing that people underestimate is just the significance of demonstrating business support for a transition to net zero. If businesses can really articulate what it means for the industry, why they want it, what policy environment can help them be not only resilient, but grab the opportunities, that's a huge message to government that they're going to get support from the, in the broadest sense, the economy. I think some of our work that we do focuses also specifically on the finance components of that as well, because countries want to attract the right capital flows into their nations. So there's a huge amount of incentives from the financial sector. And as we see ESG and green finance become more mainstream to an extent, that definitely puts pressure on governments to start taking more serious action on climate change, especially when it's not just a couple of headlines, but it's really about the quality of the data that can be provided, and also the clarity around the policies, the timing, the cost-benefit analysis, the climate impact of those policies. So there's a lot of pressure now from the financial sector really on governments to say, if we're taking this seriously, we need to know that you are as well. And then finally, it's down to the public. Everything the public can do to make their voice heard within politics, voting, what they're purchasing as well. So I think the point is it's by working on all of these fronts that we create the situation where governments can become more ambitious with their climate plans.
Yeah, absolutely. Something for everybody, a part for everyone. Now, one term that we hear a lot is that of the just transition. What do we mean by that? We hear it an awful lot. What are the key issues that make that real?
Yeah, okay. I mean, I do think there's a danger that the just transition term could be seen as a buzzword by some. And occasionally you do get buzzwords floating around. I'm not saying that doesn't happen. I think just transition's a bit different though. Partly it's got a very long history in this space, but also I think it's really about making progress quickly, what's practical. So, being based in Singapore and working a lot with Singapore's neighbors as well, you really get the sense that in emerging markets, it's got to be social development that's really put first. It's very difficult to advance any action on climate change, particularly climate change mitigation, without having a social development in there, without promising that economic progress. So I think a really good concrete example of this, if you like, is the energy transition mechanism backed by from the Asian Development Bank, and they coordinate it with a few groups. I think in particular what that tries to do, one example of it is early retirement of coal-fired power plants, for example. Now, early retirement, but in a way that makes sure those communities are retrained and that are provided new jobs as well once the coal-fired power plant is closed, because coal-fired power still is estimated to provide more than 6 million jobs in Southeast Asia, I think. So there's a lot of retraining involved to ensure it's just. And there's a long history to the just transition too. So it's a concept that's been established for more than 30 years. It's just now called just transition, which is a bit catchier than the acronym that they used to use.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Rob. I'm now going to turn to our next panelist, and I'll address my next question to Mike, if that's okay. Mike, one of the key issues in tackling climate change is around decoupling economic growth from emissions. From your perspective, what should business be doing to contribute to this?
That's an excellent question. I think top of everyone's mind these days. But I'd like to give you a very specific example, and building on the 1.5 degree sort of plan that Rob also mentioned. One development and the one tool that businesses can take on board is to implement a transition plan. And transition plan, net zero transition plans are certainly a buzzword these days in these circles. And they came really from the finance sector, the Glasgow Financial Alliance on Net Zero that was launched at the Glasgow COP, where within which a group of financial sector participants have set out their expectations of what they would like to see from businesses, both financial and real economy businesses, in terms of transitioning to net zero. So transition plans are really just a set of forward-looking steps to align your strategy, your governance, your engagement with your customers, clients, and suppliers and societies towards an orderly transition to net zero. And with that, it's really a simple, as simple as you can get with these things, to plan your decarbonization strategy into your overall strategy. And what's really great is we're seeing a lot of buzz around this topic, and I think these types of very pragmatic steps and strategies to really sort of see where you are at now and where you need to get to, and then figure out the steps in between, are as simple as you can get and as effective as you can get in terms of getting there. One last point I'd like to add to that is this is coming from the finance sector, because they are looking for places to put their money to support this transition. So not only is it a strategy or a tool for you as a business to get there, but also to make sure that you get the capital that you need to support you in that transition to net zero.
Absolutely, and so important that we have that theory of change and not just so stories about our paths to net zero. I mean, it's obviously, you mentioned it's a simple tool, but it is a complex area, and yet we need that detailed information about how different industries and individual companies are doing and whether they're doing enough. So what's the progress on meaningful disclosures about climate performance?
I think over the past 12, 24 months, we've seen a real step change in another evolution in disclosures with the launch of the International Sustainability Standards Board, which really sort of builds on the various reporting initiatives that were out there in the past around informing investors on what you're doing in terms of climate and other sustainability related matters and how you're managing away from those risks and into opportunities. We've seen these new standards come out, the IFRS Sustainability Disclosure Standards, and immense support both in terms of the private sector but also the public sector, the G20, G7, the IOSCO, which is the securities regulators membership body, really stepping behind it and saying, okay, we need to implement this now. And we're seeing governments implementing it, and companies getting ready to implement those standards on a voluntary basis. And this really means, what this really means is we're going to elevating this type of information to the same level of rigor and importance as what financial reporting has been for decades now. This is essential information, and it's now a given that the market needs this to allocate this money efficiently. Now, what we're doing at the SSE, both in this respect and around transition plans, is we are working with exchanges to provide training and capacity building to companies on markets. So we partner with stock exchanges, and we host in-depth sessions free of charge to entire markets to upskill them and get them ready for these new requirements. With the TCFD, I believe we've trained about 25,000 individuals in about 2 years, and we're hoping to really scale this up and support them to get to this new level so that we can really sort of kickstart, and level up that investment that needs to be supporting these transitions.
That's amazing. Thanks very much, Mike. I'm going to turn next to Martin, if that's okay. Martin, it's clear, we're talking about this huge transition and this rapid pace of change. We've heard about some of these big shifts that we're expecting, but from your perspective, what essential skills are going to be needed to drive a successful green revolution and a just transition?
Yeah, I mean, great question. And, we're at the start of a global transformation across the whole global economy. There's business as usual isn't going to be able to get us where we need to be, and therefore we've got a massive amount of change, and that's across all sectors. So whether it's the power system, the water management sector, and utilities, transportation, manufacturing, food system, there's going to be no part of the global economy and national economies which aren't going to be part of that transition. And I think governments are starting to think about this a bit more coherently. partly through green jobs. So they talk a lot about green jobs, and it's quite interesting in some ways, but you sometimes kind of go down a rabbit hole because they kind of say, well, we need X number of people to support installation of solar panels and all the rest of it, and but the reality is that all companies are going to have to make all of their jobs a bit greener. So whether it's going to be building sustainability into procurement and companies starting to procure with sustainability and climate change in mind, so starting to change that role and that function from one that is only cost and quality, also now to think carbon intensity. So we've just been hearing about the disclosure standards, and they're pushing scope 3, so not only your direct emissions but those associated with the products and services that you are procuring, and therefore companies are going to have to start to provide this information, and therefore you're going to want to be able to demonstrate that your impact is kind of reducing. So you're going to have to think about, how do we procure with carbon in mind? That's a very, very different skill than starting to have kind of products and services which are designed with climate change and sustainability in mind. So we need engineers and product developers to think about this as well. So the products and services that they're going to be putting onto the market. It's the same on logistics. It's going to be the same on how we manage and use land. So there are jobs popping up all over the place which are going to be impacted by this transition. And I think that's kind of really interesting. Some work that we published last year with Deloitte on a green workforce transformation and mapped out kind of quite a few areas, but we distilled it down into 4 shifts that we're seeing. So one is that there's a big increase in demand for sustainability professionals. One is that their role is broadening. Secondly, that they're having to link in much more closely to organisational strategy, and also into the finance group as well. So thinking about, how do we understand climate-related risks, and how do we then work with the finance team to understand, well, what's the kind of the cost of the transition, and what are the priorities for making this transition. So I think there's kind of there's an important role there. Secondly, there's this starting to develop skills and capability in other roles and functions. So we use the phrase all jobs greener, but that goes a lot more than just general awareness raising, because the kind of the skills, the knowledge, the understanding, and the behaviours associated with that in different job families is going to be different. So can we rapidly get to a place where you need to have bespoke learning and development? Just transition, you just mentioned, and I think that's really important. There are many parts of our economies which are going to go through change. So clearly, fossil fuel extraction, big issue, but also, as we move towards electric vehicles, then, if you work in a company that makes exhaust systems and catalytic converters, your market share is going to diminish to the extent that we don't need that business in the future. But those people have some fantastic skills that we do need in the new economy. So we need to kind of find that pathway to harness the skills and capabilities that they have and make that transition. And finally, the other shift is where we're seeing new roles and jobs being created in areas around, for example, the hydrogen economy, carbon capture and storage and use. And again, some of those will lean into, skills from oil and gas sector in particular, but there are new jobs that are being created. And then there'll be other jobs that just we didn't know were going to exist. If you think about the IT revolution, who thought we were going to have a social media kind of manager in an organization 20 years ago when we first started using the internet? So these kind of roles will just evolve and develop. Exciting times though.
It's a huge agenda, it's clear. I mean, how close are we? How big are the gaps? And what are the key actions that we're looking for to fill those gaps?
Yeah, there are some big gaps, and we are, I'm working with UK government on the Green Jobs Delivery Group, and we can see where there are, some significant shortages. We don't have enough electricians that are qualified to do all the work that needs to be done, and that's a real concern if you think about, the installation of public electric vehicle charging points. Really, really important if you're going to hit the targets for the deployment of electric vehicles. And as we kind of move, not just transportation, but the way in which we're going to be using heat, the way in which we're kind of reconfiguring the national grid. So we need many more electricians and people with electrotechnical skills. We also have a shortage of welders And so if you can all the cabling that is there, so people think, it's not just what I might call a green job where we have shortages, actually some existing occupations where we're going to be leaning heavily into them. But the good thing is that we are working out what the transition means in terms of occupations and roles, and then starting to put in actions to either develop additional pathways for people to bring more people back into employment, but also to give people a better idea of the types of roles and functions that there are going to be, so that people know that these jobs are going to be durable, they're well paid, you actually have a career. It's not just come and install some solar panels and, oh, by the way, this is only a kind of a 3-4 year blip, and then you kind of, what else are you going to do? So lots going on, and green career is really important. Just one thing to mention, 80% or over 80% of the 2030 workforce is already in employment. So we can't just wait for young people who are kind of, the education system is helping to develop people with the skills that we need for the future, but we're going to have to go through a big transition within the existing workforce for the labour requirements that we've got.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Martin, for that. Finally, then, I'd like to invite Simon and Heather together to come and join me. And, we've talked about the policies, the business action, the skills gaps, but we're in a crisis and we need changes that stick. So I'm going to let you two take control of the slides now and talk to us a little about the sort of human behaviour aspect of this issue.
Great. Thanks. Yeah, I'm going to go first with this and just take you through a few slides. And this is going to be a rapid movement from solar system level to toilet paper. So bear with me. And my next slide is not working. Here we go. I'm going to start at solar system level and looking at the Earth, which will be the next slide when it comes up. This worked perfectly earlier on, and no, it isn't. Can someone move the slides on for me? This is my slide. There we go. So here's a view of the planet. This is Saturn, but actually this is just putting the significance of the Earth into context. So that's the few pixels beyond Saturn. There is the only place that we know of in the universe that has life on it, with this thin skin of atmosphere around it. Next slide, please. And people often talk about saving the planet in the context of both conservation and climate change. This is not about saving the planet, actually. Planet's seen 5 mass extinctions already. It's probably in the midst of a 6th. It'll see more as well. So this is not about saving the planet. Next slide, please. This is actually about having a planet that's habitable for humans. So over eons of time, the climate and nature have interacted. The climate's been changed by nature. Nature has changed the climate. But now, of course, and the next slide, it's people, and we've got to a point now where we're affecting the climate, and of course the climate is affecting us, and we're affecting nature, and nature is affecting us, and of course we rely on nature. So the next slide, please. The important thing here is the only blob on that diagram that can make decisions is the human one, the people one. So it is all about people, and here's one of the decisions we're talking about today, about keeping the 1.5 degrees alive. And sometimes I wonder that this is framed not very well, because people think, oh, we're hitting net zero by 2050 and then it's all going to be fine. But actually just the physics says that that's the point where we stop putting greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and it's going to stay warm. So actually we need to eventually to go beyond net zero into taking CO2 and other greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere. And so this is all about our choices. Next slide, please. And the choices are not easy. Basically, this comes down to humans, whether they're acting individually or as business executives or as government individuals. It's all about people. And often it's talked about wanting to have informed consumers that can make the right decisions. Just a very quick example here of how difficult that can be. So if you want something to carry your shopping home in, environmentally, do you choose a plastic bag, a paper bag, or a cotton bag? Now, if you take the fact that if you maybe only use it once, then actually the carbon footprint of a plastic bag is actually much, much lower. Paper bags seem much nicer, but of course it involves cutting down trees. And then of course, when the bag later degrades, it is actually itself going to release methane as it degrades. Cotton, that takes up large amounts of area and water to produce as well. So the point here is that actually decisions are not straightforward. And if we expect everyone to be informed consumers and make the right decisions at the right times, it's not going to work. So we need to understand humans and how they work and how they make decisions. So I'm just going to pass over to Heather briefly to talk a bit about humans, and then I'm going to give you an example.
Thanks, Simon. So yeah, as a behavioral scientist, I'd love to dive into the people side of this. And the first thing to consider is that for many people, change is more threatening than challenging. We see it as the destroyer of what's familiar, what's comfortable, rather than the creator of what's new and exciting. And so this affects our ability to engage in climate positive behaviors. You know, climate change is so vast, it's not the type of risk that we're used to worrying about. Climate supportive behaviors that we want people to do aren't yet established as strong social norms. Things like consuming less, driving less, flying less, they're not normal behaviors for us as of yet. So we have to keep that in mind when we're trying to support people to create these changes. Some people see any behavioral switch to do with climate change as a loss, as inconvenience. You know, cycling more instead of driving, flying less, or having to think about meat-free meals for a family. The other thing is we get very little feedback on our climate positive behaviors. We don't know if we're doing well, and feedback is so vital to human motivation. We also don't know what to do. Simon's plastic bag example just there, you know, that will have shocked many of us. We don't know how we can make a difference. We assume that people have the skills and capabilities to create change, but we're not empowering them to do so. And when it comes to trying to empower free-range, irrational humans to change their climate-related behaviors by telling people, or politicians for that matter, how bad it all is, it's disempowering and it's not going to help create change. And the problem here is motivation. We assume that everyone's primary motivation is climate change. And a recent survey in the UK showed that those that had adopted lower carbon lifestyles found that concern for the environment was often not their primary motivation. So if we're not motivated by climate, what are we motivated by? We're motivated by safety. We're motivated by love. We're motivated by money. We're motivated by health. So we need to use positive rather than negative messages that will resonate with those that we want to empower to create changes. We need to help them see that they can make a difference. On a grassroots level, it's as simple as finding out people's motives and highlighting the co-benefits of sustainable behaviors, just as how it will save people money or make them healthier in addition to conserving natural resources. Ultimately, if we want to make change happen, we need to look at human motivation and not assume people are motivated to change for climate reasons alone. Change is created through implementation, not information. So let's stop educating people on the crisis of climate change and instead tap into what matters most to them. And in the process, empower them with the skills, knowledge, and confidence to make change happen. Over to you, Simon.
Thanks. I'm just going to finish off with a quick example of looking at people's motivations. So if I can have the next slide, please. This was an example from a zoo in Australia, Healesville Sanctuary, and they worked out that 95% of Australians bought non-recycled toilet paper, and this is equivalent to 7 million trees in Australia being cut down every year. That's not great for the environment, and it's terrible for climate change as well. So they wanted to do a campaign with their visitors, shifting at least 10,000 households towards recycled toilet paper in 1 year. Next click, please. So they ran a campaign using the theory of planned behavior, which has been in the psychology literature for decades, and ran a campaign called, next slide please, Wipe for Wildlife. And this was done very tongue-in-cheek and also in a slightly silly way, as you'll see. So first of all, they wanted to know what the motivations were from people. So they did a bit of research and found that everyone, all their visitors, believed it would be better for wildlife and the environment if they used recycled toilet paper. So the information wasn't the issue. The belief differences between people who did and didn't were, and here's the next click, it feels uncomfortable, and also, next click, it costs more, and the next click, it's going to be too thin and tears easily. So it's all about softness, price, and strength. Next click, please. So there were a bunch of interventions done, posters about softness, price, and strength, but also, and most impactfully, next click, please, they ran this Wipe for Wildlife campaign, and they switched 27% of non-compliers to using recycled toilet paper, which is equivalent to about 36,000 people a year, and they fed back and they celebrated it, as you can see in this picture here. But the key member of this picture, and you can see in green there, next click, is a costume character, a superhero called Crapman. And Crapman would congratulate people coming out of the toilets for using recycled toilet paper, and he would run silly games, getting people to build tall pyramids out of toilet paper so that they could feel that it was soft. And it was this intervention, so it was understanding that actually the motivations were all, and the barriers were all about softness, price and strength, and actually then delivering a campaign in a slightly silly, tongue-in-cheek, lots of bottom humor kind of way really had that difference. So 36 people switched in that first year. The campaign is still running. Next Click Please. And I checked a couple of days ago, and they're now up to Next Click Please. 285,000 people have changed. And this is really important because what it comes down to, and the Next Click Please, which is the last slide, this is all we have. Remember, this planet that we live on, the toilet paper that we use, the bags that we buy, it's all about human decision making and protecting that thin atmosphere and keeping this planet habitable for humans and wildlife into the future as well. And that's my little slides over.
Thank you very much, Simon and Heather. That's a fantastic reminder for all of us that we're dealing with humans and we need to better understand what works in making some of these essential changes. So as I get everyone else to put their camera back on and come and join us to take a few questions at the end, maybe I can put the first one to you two, Simon and Heather. Based on what you've just told us, do you have any top tips for a campaign on climate-friendly behaviour?
Yes, so of course, something like reducing meat consumption has been talked about a lot. And again, people are not going to switch just because they go, I'm going to cut down on beef because it's good for the climate. You've got to go on personal behaviour, personal motivations, but also social motivations and also the infrastructure. So, and give people alternatives. So the alternatives have got to be tasty. It's got to be socially aspirational amongst people that the person, the person we're talking to pays attention to, and widely available and not more expensive. And sometimes it's just the default. So if you go to a restaurant, maybe it's only vegan food available, or if you go to a conference, that's the default. And maybe meat's available, but it's an added option. So this is the whole thing about understanding people's motivations and working on that, not just telling them to do it because it's good for the planet, because that's not going to work.
Absolutely, just sort of taking the friction out of making a more sustainable choice. Fantastic.
It's got to be easy and fun.
Easy and fun. I think that's a code to live by. Okay, I've got a few questions that have come in from the audience. So I wonder if I could address this one to Rob. It says, Rob, you spoke earlier about the fact that we're gradually decreasing the level of global heating we're headed towards, but is this happening fast enough? And what would you say to those who are greatly concerned about the speed of progress so far? Just a tiny question there for you, Rob.
Just a tiny question. I mean, very good question. Is it happening fast enough? I think when we saw the first national level plans and commitments, it came through with, I think the window of warming was 2.7 to 3.6, if my memory serves me. That was a bit worrying. That was really saying, okay, the first commitments under the Paris Agreement look a bit weak potentially. I know there was a lot of narrative about Paris being weak. I think the fact that now we're seeing, starting to come lower down towards 2.5 at the first global stock take, that's what this year is kind of about, this big stock take of increasing ambition. It's encouraging to see the first one has made progress. Yeah, obviously always would be wonderful to see more. But I think, really it's interesting because some people then argue that what you really need is, legal sanctions on countries to force stronger responses. But that was tried with the Kyoto Protocol, and it's very difficult to do when you've got, trans-jurisdictional agreements like this. So really what the Paris Agreement hinges on is much more diplomatic efforts, the bilateral, the multilateral agreements, to really make sure that different blocs or different countries are able to work together to advance climate change. And I think what we're seeing is that is working. I think you have to say it's not fast enough, but I think you also have to recognize this is working. And the more we get familiar with the Paris Agreement and operationalizing, you've just got to hope that it will become, once that momentum builds, that critical mass build. We already have it really, but it's just going to get more and more as we go. So, but then again, I'm always optimistic, Steph. I don't know.
I think we've got to be. I think we've got to keep that optimism going. Mike, I've got a question for you here. It says you've been talking about disclosures around ISSB and so forth. Do disclosures themselves lead to change in the companies, or is there a risk of it being a tick box exercise?
This is an excellent question. I can perhaps go back to the old adage, what gets measured gets managed. We've heard this so many times, but it's so true. When you look at, for example, the ISSB's standards and where they came from, it's the foundation of all of it is governance. So thinking about what processes, systems do you have in place, do people have the right responsibilities and incentives to keep them going into the trajectory that has been set out by management, by the board. So I think it's an often underrepresented benefit of it. We often report because we have to, because Lois tells us, or because our investors are knocking on our door and want this information. But I think it would be a shame if all that effort wouldn't also have that additional benefit. So I'd actually suggest thinking about this as an internal improvement exercise as well, and a way for you to really understand practically what you need to do, both in terms of your business model, but also your staff and others to drive forward in the right direction.
Brilliant, thank you. Right, I've got a question here. Are there any governments really leading the way and thinking beyond net zero? And if so, what can the UK team learn from this? Would anyone like to pick that one up? If not, I'm going to point it at somebody.
I'll kind of stick my neck out. I think the reality is that there are very few places in the world which have cracked this. There are some fairly small scale areas where they are getting to the point where they are net zero genuinely, but this is not something that is translatable at this present time to many of the large economies, many of the emerging economies. So I think the real answer to this is that we've got a long way to go, and we're not going fast enough, and the scale of the transition is enormous. And today we're at 1.2 degrees, and you see the effects of that in different parts of the world, and we're going to overshoot 1.5. And then the question is, can we get back to 1.5 by the end of this century? And the level of disruption and impact that we see is going to be colossal. And we don't quite know how that's going to kind of play out with potentially cascading risks. So I think no country can have cracked this, because on the one hand they might have been able to kind of reduce their emissions significantly, but they will still be subject to significant change. And kind of working that through in our systems, our infrastructure, our communities is going to be critical. That's cheered everybody up, hasn't it?
It really has, Martin. So, but it also segues really neatly into the next question I've got here, which is one for Heather, I think. Do you think there's a correlation between the levels of public stress or anxiety, depression or worry about the climate and how they respond to making these sustainable decisions?
Yes, absolutely. When we see something as overwhelming, we don't even know where to start. And we've been constantly hit with the rhetoric, well, this is a climate crisis. If we look at all the words, they're all actually quite stress-inducing words. And so that when we think that we have no ability to change something, we disengage. We're less likely to actually want to make changes. Whereas, I like to say, heroes are made, not born. It's through the small changes and feeling enabled and empowered within your community that actually turns you into an advocate, that turns you into wanting to make changes in your political system, that turns you into campaigning for climate change over time. But we need to start small, and we need to start telling people what are the things that they can do, rather than just telling them that this is a huge problem that none of us can ever solve, because it's completely disempowering, it's completely anxiety inducing, and it's not what's supportive of long-term change.
Brilliant, thank you. We're back up there again. We've got some of the optimism back. So just before we close, if possible, I'd like to ask you all for your insight, really. If you could very briefly give us, what's your key hope for what comes out of COP28? What are the agreements you're most hoping to see? I'm going to go around in the order you appear on my screen, so I'm starting with Simon.
I'm just going to say that just the understanding it's all about people, and it's all about people, and it doesn't matter whether that's individuals or company directors or government officials or anybody. It's all about the decisions they make. And like I said before, it's got to be motivated positively, aspirational, fun, easy. That's what we've got to think about. Fine, make the declarations, but then let's get going.
Brilliant, thank you. Heather.
Yeah, I would echo that. I would say, we need to focus on what people's motivations and desires are, because in any type of change, that is ultimately how we support people to create that change. Making it easy, making it fun, making it obvious, as you said, Stephanie, reducing the friction to it. As Martin said, building skills. Let's turn intentions into actions through giving people the skills to create change, rather than just relying on change just to happen as if by magic. So focusing on those skills is really going to make a difference.
Wouldn't that be great if this was the action COP? Martin, can I move on to you?
Yeah, I mean, that skills piece is really important. At the moment, it never gets covered in the cover text. So the conclusions of COP never talk about skills, jobs, capacity to do this work. And I think, NDCs, national indicators from governments, need to be underpinned by the kind of the mechanisms that they're going to have in place to actually deliver on their ambitions. And without that, I think we're going to really struggle. So that's what we want to see. We want to see NDCs have a requirement to build the capacity and capability to drive change all around the world.
Brilliant, thank you. And Mike?
I think there strong commitments, of course, from governments are important, but I think one other element that's been growing over the past 5 or 6 years is private sector being there and proposing solutions. We are talking about trillions of dollars that need to happen, go in this annually to get to a not completely dangerous state. So businesses, exchanges, investors pledging in line with science. That's very important to be part of the solution and support the solution, I think is going to be essential. So in addition to the political agreements, I think it'll be interesting to see what private sector commitments will come out of this one, as well as they do every year, to get us closer to where we need to go.
Absolutely. And the final word to you, Rob.
No pressure. I think, to me, there was a groundbreaking moment last year when the Loss and Damage Fund was proposed. And this is really key because it's first time that there's been this sort of formal recognition that industrialized nations have a responsibility to pay for a lot of the damages caused by climate change, since they were the first to emit. So I think this COP, what I was hoping for was, to have significant progress on that front. On Thursday, there were already announcements of 420 million, I think, going towards that fund as well, and that it will be housed in the World Bank. But 420 million, I would say, is a drop. Is not enough yet. We need 100 billion in that sort of space by 2030, and like Mike said as well, a lot more money in the whole arena for tackling climate change as well.
Brilliant. Well, I'm glad that at least Rob's wish has come true so far with this COP, which is great. We'll see where we get to with the rest of them. It's time for us to close, but I'd just like to say thank you so much to our brilliant panel today, and also thank you to the audience who posed some great questions which allowed me to select one for each person, which was perfect. It was a great conversation. Thank you all. We'll all be watching events closely over the coming days to see if some of the issues you've raised have been addressed. Thank you to everyone who dialed in for joining us. You can watch the recording of the session on RSK's website later, and do feel free to share on social media using the hashtag #VoicesRising. Thank you very much, and have a good rest of your COP.